Now, Jamie, I will let you introduce Digby to everybody here, but also I know that we're going to dive into that wonderful world of how do you build trust between mining companies and also investors as well, which is a topic that we have been dipping in and out of over the course of the week so far, but I'm really looking forward to hear what you've got to say. So everybody, please welcome to our virtual stage, Jamie Strauss. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us what on earth is this thing called Digby?
So thank you so much indeed, and really honoured to be back here for the, I'm thinking it's the third or fourth year, I can never remember. Yes, as you explained, I founded Digby. I've spent 35 years in mining finance. I know the investor world extremely well. Globally, really, but also the mining individual companies. And I really wanted to give something back to the industry. And then I met up with Sarah about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was just after a chance meeting that I had had with two people, Evie Hambro from BlackRock and Mike Barton from Orion, both who asked me to use the Digby platform to ultimately come up with an ESG solution for the mining industry. And what we agreed on fairly quickly was we needed to remove confusion to help these companies navigate, know what to disclose, but also to provide standardized data out to these different institutions and other stakeholders to allow the mining industry to raise credibility, which is really where I think we're today coming back to, and raise trust in what the industry, how it operates and how it intends to operate in the future as well. Equally to provide a communication platform with regards to ESG so that it can go not only to the stewards of ESG, the investors, but also to insurers and to communities and other stakeholders within the mining industry. So we launched a couple of years ago. It's been a really heartwarming progress. The feedback's outstanding. We've really enjoyed, I think, with the team at Satala, looking at particularly the companies that are coming to second and now third year renewals, how that's progressing, the impact it is having in the boardroom on culture, on operations and going through. And ultimately, I'll leave the introduction to this is, I think trust can be built through transparency and engagement and measurement and ultimately communication of data when it's asked correctly and when it's assessed appropriately and therefore communicated to the right different stakeholders. So I'll leave that introduction as it is, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Jamie. So let's just dive straight into through the eyes of an investor, and of course they can take many different forms. For an investor to trust an opportunity enough to actually give some of their money and put it into that opportunity, what do they need? What does that actually look like to almost say, yes, I trust you enough? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And in fact, I might start off by saying, I think everyone knows the politicization of ESG or sustainability to some extent. And the most important statement was the head of State Street, or head of their sustainability, who was an open Republican, spoke at another conference, and he said, look, forget the whole politicization of it. ESG, when it's done properly, provides us with the means to mitigate risk within our portfolio, and that is our primary job. So the important thing here is, what do they need in order to allow them to have the trust in that data? And ultimately, they need to have data which they can trust, which covers all of the spectrum of ESG, which relates to that company, project, whatever it happens to be, in whatever industry it may be, and in a way that it can continue to assess and monitor that on an ongoing basis and integrate it within their process. It's very similar to looking for whether or not a company is going to deliver 1 million ounces of gold or whatever it is over a period of time. They need to have this info. They need to know what that company's intention is. Is it in the culture of that company? And if it is, then to be able to assess that to see whether or not that management is delivering on that. And if they can do that, they can raise the trust on it, which also means, I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest this, that a well-structured ESG type company has a better structure internally, which therefore lowers intrinsic risk within the business.
And so with that, Jamie, in terms of, so that they want to get their hands on robust data that gives them the indication of, do we understand what your intention is? And are you actually doing all of this? Do you believe that the investors actually know what data to ask for?
No, difficult, because you've got to, the answer is no. If it was a binary answer, it's got to be no. But it's much more nuanced than that. We've got to understand that the world of investment is hugely nuanced in itself. You've got fund managers who just need to know whether or not a company is embracing ESG, and they've got the confidence in that. Then they've got companies, obviously, and investors who are looking for deep dive due diligence down to the minutiae. And I think we've come a long way. But I think the problem with the mining industry is it touches so many areas within that ESG space that I think that is been a problem for most investors, because they don't know what to ask when it comes down to the mining sector. How do they get involvement with biodiversity protection, or how do they get involvement with local social communities or local communities and wherever they may be? How do you create procurement and local economies around mines which go beyond the life of that mine? All of this is really nuanced, complex. I would not necessarily complex, but nuanced stuff, which most groups don't know. So therefore, you go down the consulting route or whatever it is to get this data. And in reality, what we could do is we can actually bring that forward through this DIGB solution to be able to give a map of that, allow management to put out their roadmap of the future, and then allow those investors to access the bits they need to, and if necessary, go deeper dive in on the back of that.
And so with that, Jamie, obviously over the last few years, with regards to organizations telling the world, okay, this is what we're doing with regards to ESG, many of them have been accused of greenwashing. Yep. How do you cut through that accusation, I guess, of greenwashing, and also the trap that so many organizations can fall into, where they do start greenwashing without actually meaning to go there, if that makes sense?
Well, I think in a way, I'm going to go back to what Alison was just saying in that great interview or talk just before. And she said there's a real energy and people wanting to take control. And I think, look, the mining industry doesn't have much credibility. I think we all accept that here, but we've got to earn the trust. And this industry, and there are jurisdictions, I'd particularly focus on Australia at the moment, which I think is really, driven maybe by a new government and some other laws coming in. I'm not sure exactly where to pinpoint the change, but there's been such a fundamental change in the last 12, 18 months. And they get the benefits of ESG. They get the benefits that it has with regards to lower risk, and therefore potentially lower cost of capital and improved valuations, improved recruitment opportunities, etc. And I think this whole greenwash thing, human beings are human beings. They will be what they're being. But I think when the mining industry has the opportunity to leave the legacy behind with new management teams evolving and creating a new legacy, shall we say, of being ahead of the curve and taking an opportunity, using that word Alison says, energy, to actually portray not what history has effectively painted this industry, but actually taking a whole new chapter forward and actually getting on top of that greenwash thing and actually proving through transparency and engagement that there are real actions being taken to effectively be more sustainable, whatever that may mean in different people's eyes, to be more sustainable in an operation within the boardroom and have that culture. So it's difficult to answer because humans will be humans and they're always going to be bad actors. But I do think, and you've helped so much on this journey that I've been on, if you ask the right questions, if you go through the right process, and it's a robust process through an independent assessment, and then have that transparency capability to encourage, make sure that people look in on it as well, and ask people to look at it on a forward-looking basis. This has been one of Adam Matthews's big things, I think, at the Church of England, is if you don't have forward-looking things, then things can't be, if everything is backward-looking, it's out of date before you've started looking at it. And it's not usable as a means of management action when it comes to making decision making, or board action when it comes to decision making process. So I don't think any of us should assume that greenwash is going to go, but I do see so much energy within this mining industry, particularly from, I think some leadership from some of the major companies, but with the new management teams coming in and really getting this and understanding the benefits of valuation and other benefits that can come through ESG.
So with that, Jamie, I guess what you're describing there is a huge amount of change that's going on at the moment, which is great. Now, focusing in on that word of change, traditionally, mining has been seen as very, very high risk, and especially exploration, as something to invest in. And I guess there's a very specific group of investors who traditionally would have been open to investing within mining. Do you see that changing going into the future? So, for example, if mining can show the world that actually, we can do this in a responsible manner, and actually there are all of these opportunities in front of us, does that open the door to a different group of investors, for example?
Sarah, my one single goal with my hat on with regards to historically being involved in the financial industry. Obviously, we want this, the industry to be good and to have better impact on the ground and communities to be better off and everything. But the mining industry, the opportunity from an investment point of view, I've never seen anything so big in my life. The opportunity to turn the smallest pool of capital that any industry, this is a $1 trillion industry. It runs on a pool of capital that is shrinking day in, day out. And it's got headwinds over the last 2 or 3 years because all of these traditional funds have become green, and they're certainly not going to put a mining company into that as their first investment, because that doesn't do too much good from a marketing point of view. So we've got such a huge opportunity to turn this to account. And the beta on that is so big, as Daniel Davidson, who's the head of, who's an MIT professor and spoke at PDAC and runs the Energy Breakthrough Technology Fund for Gates and Bezos, in his panel speak, he says, what would you imagine a new hypothetical mid-sized company producing critical minerals that is embracing ESG and has no legacy? What do you think it would be valued on a cash flow basis? And the conversation went around and everything. They centered on somewhere between about 14 and 17, 18 times cash flow. BHP and Rio Tinto trade on 4.6 and 4.8 respectively today. That's a 3 times uplift in valuation by doing nothing. That's forgetting the critical minerals boom and all the rest of it. It's purely a matter of reputational risk that we have to remove. And what is even more impressive from the data that we got actually from my panel at PDAC this year was we were looking at the correlation between ESG ratings of the metals and mining sector using Thomson Reuters data and the cost of capital. Now, it came out completely different to what we thought. We thought the sector would be poorly perceived and had a very high cost of capital. Well done on the cost of capital. It's the worst in the industry. In fact, it's the cost of equity which is the worst in the industry. The cost of debt actually is not quite as bad. But what was most interesting was where the metals and mining sector is based on the Thomson Reuters data. And it's in the top quartile. It's in the top quartile. Now, everybody can have an argument as to whether that's right, wrong, or whatever. But what I would actually say is the sector's been doing ESG for 20 odd years. It's been doing programs locally, socially, environmentally. It's had regulations put onto it. It's done this. There's been a corporate governance overhaul. There's been mining codes introduced, et cetera, et cetera. So perhaps it's not so surprising when you actually open the lid and you actually look at individual things that this sector is actually reasonably well rated, not just reasonably well rated, very well rated. But there's a communication gap and a trust gap between the cost of capital, which you can invertly say is the valuation of the sector or the cost of equity, and therefore the position which it sits in with regards to ESG. So we need to go back to your question is, we need to build the trust in order to allow the reputational risks to be removed. And I truly believe, being slightly commercial here, I truly believe what we have built with regards to Digby allows those investors and other stakeholders to be able to hang their coat on and suddenly say, yes, I can invest in this sector because I now have a way to means to monitor and track this in a trusted basis. The opportunity is literally one of the largest investment opportunities I have seen in my lifetime. if we get it right, if we do it properly, and if there are leaders who embrace and take this on and go forward. From the smallest companies, as Alison was saying, you know, right from the early stage of exploration, all the way through to the bigger companies who need to standardize and improve the communication of what they're putting out.
So, Jamie, I think you're listening to what you're saying there, the potential that's sitting on the table, that 14 to 17 times valuation is just huge with regards to what I guess exploration, development, mining companies are used to. I wonder if I bring in Ludovine on this, because I could see that Ludovine was very excited by some of what you were saying there. Ludovine, do you have any questions for Jamie?
Yes and no. These are things that we've discussed at length. I think what's really interesting is that, as Jamie was saying, there are other stakeholders who are now circling the mineral investment space. I'm thinking typically of OEMs, some midstream capacity, sometimes also linked to geostrategic positioning. You've got countries that are now backing fully the development of midstream capacity and trying to use that to change the flows. The value of mining investors' capacity to explain what they have been doing, their stewardship principles, and how they are performing and how the industry is performing is a big part of making that new investment pool available. So I think, you know, where I see the most value from the work that Digby does and others is actually to take things up a notch, to demonstrate the stewardship by mineral investors, by royalty companies. So almost, you know, going up to the next stage of saying, okay, who's the next person we need to convince? And I know that that's part of your strategy, and I think that's a big part of the opportunity today.
Yep, I would agree wholeheartedly. I mean, the goal is to pronounce this wider, louder, and everything, and give everybody the opportunity. And, you know, I haven't had the chance to listen to all of the talks yet, but this affects every single one of us. And I spoke at a dinner last week, and we've got to stop. The opportunity here is to stop looking at the cycles, which we have no control over, and to do things internally, which we can control. And given that we're the bottom of the ladder with regards to respect and valuation, the upside is so much bigger as a result of it. The relative arguments are so much smaller. So if we focus in on, if we take the opportunity and embrace the world of ESG and do it properly and get leaders to pronounce that, and there are leaders who are doing this, and if we can do that, then we can have that impact across the entire spectrum of the speakers here today. No, there's no reason why the mining industry cannot be larger than the oil and gas industry within a few years. Valuation and also probably critical mineral production increasing. So the opportunity here is now and present, and it's exciting.
I think with that, Jamie, that is a phenomenal note to say thank you very much and finish on. Really exciting. And I think what you've brought to the table here is that perspective coming in from that investor space and really the opportunity that is there. But so much of the, I guess, the challenge that we need to be able to address is that trust. How do we build trust with those individuals to make them feel comfortable?
And we're not there yet. And I think that's the important, you know, one can have aspirations, excitement and enthusiasm and passion, but you've still got to make that bridge. And we've not yet got there, despite evidence that, as Ludovine was just alluding to, there is evidence of it beginning to happen. We've got to go further.
Fantastic. So with that, thank you so much, Jamie, for coming and joining us today. Brilliant as ever. Round of applause. Thank you very much, Jamie. Great.